4 days straight, not a single signal. No radio, no gunfire, no voice. Through the endless white blizzard, the entire platoon began to believe she was dead. Then, just as the noose tightened, as the snow turned red and the last thread of hope began to fade, a dry crack echoed from a place no one dared believe a human could exist. From over 4,000 meters away, a single bullet tore through the winter wind, and the entire battlefield fell silent. The outpost clung to the mountainside like a wound that wouldn't heal. Captain Daniel Hayes stood at the reinforced window, watching snow erase the world. It had been falling for 72 hours without pause. The kind of snow that didn't just cover things, it buried them, erased them, made them disappear as if they'd never existed at all. "Still nothing?" he asked without turning. Corporal Marcus Webb sat hunched over the radio equipment, headphones pressed against his ears so hard his knuckles had gone white. He'd been sitting that way for 6 hours. "Nothing, sir. Just static." Hayes felt the weight of it settle deeper into his chest. 4 days ago, he'd sent Sergeant Riley Patterson out on a long-range reconnaissance mission. The enemy had been probing their position for weeks, testing their perimeter, looking for weaknesses. They needed eyes on the ridge system to the north, the high ground that could turn this entire sector into a killing field if the wrong people occupied it. Riley had been the obvious choice. The only choice, really. She'd grown up in Alaska, hunting caribou with her father before she could write her own name, joined the Army at 19, scored expert marksman on her first qualification, and never looked back. By 24, she was the best long-range shooter in the battalion. By 26, she was training instructors. But more than her skill, it was her temperament that made her invaluable. Riley didn't panic, didn't rush, could lie in the same position for 18 hours without moving anything but her eyes. Hayes had seen combat soldiers with a decade of experience lose their nerve in a firefight. He'd never seen Riley lose hers. "She knew the risks," said Lieutenant Sarah Chen, joining him at the window. Her breath fogged the glass. "Weather can turn up here in minutes." "I know," Hayes said, but knowing didn't make it easier. The mission plan had been straightforward. Riley would push north to Observation Point Gamma, approximately 12 kilometers from the outpost. From there, she'd have a direct sightline over the entire valley system and the 3 passes the enemy could use to flank their position. She'd packed for 5 days, carried enough ammunition to hold off a small army, and set out before dawn on a clear morning. The storm hit 36 hours later. At first, they'd maintained regular contact. Riley had reached the observation point, established her hide, and begun mapping enemy movements. Her reports were crisp and professional. Squad-sized elements moving through Pass 2, probable supply convoy spotted near Grid Echo 7. Weather deteriorating but manageable. Then the blizzard arrived in earnest. The last transmission they'd received was garbled, barely audible through the interference. Riley's voice, still calm but tighter than usual. "Visibility 0, can't maintain." And then, nothing. Just the howl of static that sounded too much like wind screaming through a grave. Hayes had tried to send a recovery team. Lieutenant Chen had volunteered to lead it herself, but the storm had turned the mountain into a death trap. Wind speeds hit 80 miles per hour. Temperature dropped to 20 below. The snow fell so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. 3 times they tried to push out. 3 times they'd been forced back before they made it 100 meters from the gate. Now it was day 4, and the platoon was beginning to fracture. Private First Class Tommy Brennan paced the operations room like a caged animal. He was 21, fresh out of infantry school, and he'd attached himself to Riley like a kid brother from the moment he'd arrived at the outpost. She'd taken time to mentor him, taught him how to properly zero his rifle, how to read terrain, how to control his breathing under stress. "She's out there," Brennan said for the 100th time. "She's alive. I know it." Sergeant First Class Victor Reyes, a 15-year veteran with 3 combat deployments under his belt, shook his head slowly. "Kid, nobody survives 4 days in that." He gestured toward the window, where the storm continued its relentless assault. "Even if she found shelter, even if she stayed dry, the cold alone would kill her." "You don't know Riley like I do," Brennan shot back, his voice cracking. "I know the mountain," Reyes said quietly. "And the mountain doesn't care how good you are." Hayes let them argue. It was better than the alternative, the heavy silence that had settled over the platoon like a shroud. Men checked and rechecked weapons they'd already cleaned. Others stared at walls. A few wrote letters they weren't sure would ever get mailed. The outpost itself was secure. For now. They had ammunition, supplies, enough fuel to keep the generators running for another 3 weeks. But they were cut off. The storm had closed the supply route, and enemy activity had increased dramatically over the past 48 hours. Without Riley's eyes on that high ground, they were operating blind. "Sir," Webb said suddenly, straightening in his chair. "Movement on the perimeter sensors. Southeast quadrant." Hayes moved to the tactical display. Green dots marking their defensive positions, red triangles showing where the sensors had detected activity. There were more red triangles than there had been yesterday. "They're getting bolder," Chen observed. "They know we can't see them," Hayes replied. "They know we're isolated, and they know we're alone," he thought but didn't say. Because if Riley was gone and every hour of silence made it more likely, then they'd lost more than their best shooter. They'd lost their window into the enemy's intentions. The storm howled louder, as if in agreement. Brennan stood at the window now, pressing his forehead against the frozen glass. "She's out there," he whispered, barely audible. "She's waiting. She's watching." Reyes started to say something, then stopped. There was no point. Hope and denial looked the same in the beginning. Only time would reveal which one you'd been holding on to. Hayes returned to the radio station, lifted the handset, switched to Riley's frequency. He'd done this every hour since the transmission failed. Always the same result. "Blackbird, this is Eagle Actual. Do you copy? Over." Static. "Riley, if you can hear me, we're still here. We're waiting. Over." Nothing. He set the handset down gently, like it was something fragile that might break. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing footprints, covering roads, burying the world in white silence. Somewhere out there, beyond the storm, beyond the range of their radios and the reach of their hope, Riley Patterson was either dead or alive, and they had no way of knowing which. The whispers started on the morning of day 5. Hayes found them clustered in small groups during shift changes, conversations that died the moment he walked past. He recognized the pattern. He'd seen it before, in other units, other deployments. When soldiers start preparing themselves for bad news, they begin the grieving process early. It's a survival mechanism. Easier to accept the loss now than to keep hoping and have that hope shattered later. "She was good," Specialist Jennifer Walsh said to her fire team in the mess hall. Past tense. Hayes heard it as he passed with his coffee. "Best I ever saw." Private Marcus Liu nodded slowly. "Think they'll send a recovery team when the storm breaks?" "If there's anything to recover," Walsh replied. Brennan slammed his tray down hard enough to make everyone jump. "She's not dead." The mess hall went quiet. "Tommy," Walsh said carefully, "we all want to believe." "Then believe," Brennan cut her off. His eyes were red-rimmed, either from lack of sleep or crying or both. "Don't talk about her like she's already gone. Don't give up on her." Walsh exchanged a look with Liu, then nodded slowly. But Hayes could see she didn't mean it. She was humoring the kid, letting him hold on to his denial a little longer. It was Reyes who finally broke the tension. "Brennan, you're on perimeter watch in 10. Get your gear." Brennan left without another word, his breakfast untouched. In the command post, Hayes convened a meeting with his senior leaders. Chen, Reyes, and Staff Sergeant Anthony Burke, who'd been running the tactical operations cell since the storm hit. "We need to talk about contingencies," Hayes said, hating every word. Burke pulled up a map on the display screen. "Enemy activity has increased 30% in the last 48 hours. They're not just probing anymore, they're positioning." Chen leaned forward, studying the pattern of red markers. "They're setting up for a coordinated assault. 3 approaches, probably simultaneous. Without eyes on the high ground, we won't see them coming until they're on top of us," Reyes added. Hayes studied the map, trying to see what Riley would have seen. From observation point Gamma, she would have had a perfect view of all 3 approaches. She could have given them hours of warning, allowed them to shift forces, set up killing zones, call in artillery strikes if they had air support. But they didn't have air support. The storm had grounded everything with rotors or wings. They were on their own. "We could pull back," Burke suggested. Consolidate at the fallback position. Wait for extraction when the weather clears. That's 40 kilometers through a blizzard, Chen countered. We'd lose half the platoon to exposure before we made it 10. Better than losing all of them here, Burke shot back. Hayes raised a hand, cutting off the argument before it escalated. We're not pulling back, not yet. Then what's the play, sir? Reyes asked. Hayes didn't have a good answer. Every option was bad. Stay and potentially get overrun. Leave and possibly freeze to death in the mountains. Send out a recovery team and risk losing more soldiers looking for one who was probably already gone. We hold, he said finally. We reinforce the perimeter. We conserve ammunition. And we hold. The others nodded, but he could see the doubt in their eyes. After they left, Chen lingered. You think she's alive? It wasn't a question. Hayes stared at the map, at the red markers creeping closer, at the empty space where Riley's position should have been reporting. I think if anyone could survive 4 days in that storm, it would be her. That's not the same as thinking she's alive. No, Hayes admitted. It's not. Chen moved to the window. The storm had lessened slightly. Visibility had improved from 0 to maybe 30 meters. Still deadly, but no longer absolutely impossible. Brennan asked me if we could send out a small team, she said. Just 2 people, fast and light, check the observation point. And you said no. I said I'd ask you. Hayes closed his eyes. He'd been dreading this conversation, because the truth was brutal and simple. He couldn't justify risking 2 more lives to confirm what they already knew. The cold calculus of command demanded he write Riley off and focus on keeping the rest of his platoon alive. But Riley had never given up on any of them. If the storm breaks enough to make it feasible, he said carefully, we'll reconsider. It was the best answer he could give. Chen seemed to understand. She nodded and left him alone with his doubts. That afternoon, the enemy tested their eastern perimeter. Just a probe 8 to 10 fighters moving through the snow, trying to gauge their response time and defensive strength. Reyes had the ready reaction force mobilized in 90 seconds. They drove the probe back without taking casualties. But the message was clear. The enemy knew they were vulnerable. That night, Hayes couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Riley out there in the dark, in the cold, in the silence. Was she injured, frozen, already dead and covered by 10 feet of snow? Or was she doing exactly what she'd been trained to do, surviving, adapting, watching? He pulled up her personnel file on his tablet, even though he knew every detail by heart. Riley Ann Patterson, 28 years old. No family father killed in a hunting accident when she was 16. Mother died of cancer 2 years later. The army was her family now. This platoon was her family. There was a commendation in her file from a previous deployment. She'd held a position alone for 3 days under sporadic enemy fire, providing overwatch for a convoy route. When they'd finally relieved her, she'd been dehydrated and exhausted, but still had her sense of humor intact. Her only request had been for a hot shower and a cheeseburger. Hayes smiled despite himself, then felt guilty for it. In the bunk room, Brennan lay awake too. Hayes could see him through the open door, staring at the ceiling, lips moving in what might have been prayer. The kid believed, truly, deeply believed that Riley was coming back. Hayes envied him that certainty. Because as much as he wanted to believe, as much as he hoped, every hour of silence made belief harder and doubt easier. The mountain didn't care about hope. The storm didn't respect faith. And the enemy was closing in. Riley Patterson had been cold before. Growing up in Alaska, she'd learned early that cold wasn't just a sensation, it was an entity. A presence that tested you, pushed you, waited patiently for you to make a mistake. But she'd never been this cold. The cave wasn't really a cave, more of a crack in the rock face, barely wide enough for her body, just deep enough to keep the worst of the wind off her. She'd found it on the second day when the storm intensified beyond anything the forecasts had predicted. Her original hide position, carefully constructed with a view of the entire valley system, had become a death trap. The wind had been strong enough to lift her, to throw her against the rocks. So she'd abandoned it and climbed higher, which seemed counterintuitive but was actually sound survival logic. Up here, the rock formations created small pockets of dead air, places where the wind couldn't quite reach. The crack in the rock had saved her life. Now, on day 5, She inventoried her situation with the same methodical calm she applied to everything. Radio. Destroyed. She'd tried to protect it, but sometime during the climb to the shelter, it had struck a boulder hard enough to crack the casing. Water had gotten inside. Even if she could fix it, transmitting would be suicide. The enemy had direction-finding equipment, and a signal from her position would paint a target on her back. Food, 8 MRE packets, plus the emergency rations in her survival kit, enough for 10 days if she was careful, but the cold burned calories faster than normal, call it 7 days. Water, unlimited, if you counted melting snow. She'd been doing that in her body heat, letting snow sit in a plastic bag against her stomach until it liquefied. Slow, uncomfortable, but effective. Ammunition, 37 rounds for her M24 rifle, another 45 for her sidearm, more than enough for what she needed. Injuries, minor. A gash on her left forearm from the climb, already scabbed over. Bruised ribs, probably from getting thrown against the rock. Her right ankle was swollen, but she could still put weight on it. She'd survive. But survival wasn't the mission. From her new position, higher and more exposed than her original observation point, Riley had a different view of the valley. Not as comprehensive, but in some ways better. She could see further into the northern passes, including routes she hadn't been able to monitor before. And what she saw made her blood run colder than the temperature ever could. The enemy wasn't just positioning for an assault. They were preparing for an annihilation. Through her spotting scope, she counted at least a company-sized element, maybe more. Heavy weapons teams, mortars, what looked like crew-served machine guns being set up on the ridgeline across from the outpost. They were setting up a coordinated, three-pronged assault with overwhelming firepower. The outpost didn't stand a chance. Riley ran the calculations in her head. Hayes had maybe 40 soldiers, most of them support troops, not infantry. Good defensive position, but not good enough to withstand what was coming. They'd get pinned down, suppressed by machine gun fire and mortars, then overrun from 3 directions at once. It would be over in an hour, unless she did something about it. The problem was distance and angle. From her current position to the enemy command post, she'd identified it by the pattern of movement. The way soldiers kept reporting, there was approximately 4,200 meters, 4 kilometers, 2.5 miles. She'd made shots at 2,000 meters before. The longest confirmed kill in her career was 2,400 meters, and that had been on a perfect day with ideal conditions. This was not a perfect day. Wind speeds at her elevation were probably 40 to 50 miles per hour, gusting higher. Temperature was somewhere around 20 below zero, which affected bullet trajectory. The air was thinner up here, which helped velocity but complicated the mathematics. And she'd be shooting at a steep downward angle, which meant accounting for gravity differently. Plus, the curvature of the Earth became a factor at this range. The Coriolis effect. The rotation of the planet itself would influence where the bullet went. It should be impossible. Riley pulled out her range card and began making notes with a pencil that kept freezing. She'd have to do all the calculations by hand. Her electronic ballistic computer had died along with the radio. Wind speed and direction at her position, at mid-range, at the target. She estimated using the movement of snow, the bend of exposed vegetation, the sound the wind made through different terrain features, temperature at altitude, temperature at the valley floor. She knew the formulas by heart, had run them 1,000 times in training. Bullet drop at extreme range. Her M118 LR ammunition would drop approximately 1,200 inches at 4,200 meters. That was 100 feet. She'd be aiming at the sky to hit a target on the ground. Coriolis effect for a southward shot in the northern hemisphere. The bullet would drift east. She calculated roughly 18 inches of drift. Then there was the target itself. Moving, stationary, behind cover. She'd need to identify the highest value target, the one whose death would cause maximum disruption. Probably the commander, but she couldn't be certain. Sometimes killing the communications specialist was more effective. She'd have one shot. If she missed, the enemy would know someone was watching them. They'd accelerate their timeline, hit the outpost immediately, and Riley would have accomplished nothing except announcing her presence. If she succeeded, she might buy Hayes time, create confusion, maybe even convince the enemy that they were facing a larger force than they thought. And if she was very lucky, they might break off the assault entirely. Riley closed her eyes, letting the wind wash over her. Her body temperature was dangerously low. She'd been conserving heat, moving as little as possible, but that couldn't last forever. Soon she'd have to make a choice. Try to move to a warmer position, or commit to this shot and accept the consequences. She thought about Brennan, the kid who'd looked at her like she held all the answers. About Hayes, who'd trusted her with this mission. About Chen, Reyes, Walsh, Liu, all of them. Her family. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Riley opened her eyes and began preparing her position. She gathered rocks to build a stable rest for her rifle, cleared snow from her shooting lane, arranged her gear so she could lie in the same position for hours without moving. Then she settled in to wait. The enemy would move when they were ready, and when they did, she'd be ready too, even if it killed her. The shivering started on hour 3. Riley recognized it for what it was, the beginning of hypothermia. Her core temperature was dropping despite her layers, despite the emergency blanket wrapped around her shoulders, despite every survival technique she knew. She could retreat, work her way down the mountain, find better shelter, maybe even make it back to the outpost if the weather cleared enough. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But safety wasn't why she'd become a sniper. Through her scope, Riley watched the enemy commander emerge from his tent. She'd been observing him for the past 6 hours, building a pattern of his movements. He was methodical, professional, checked on his soldiers regularly, inspected the weapon positions personally, consulted frequently with what appeared to be his second in command. A good leader, which made him exactly the right target. The problem wasn't just the distance anymore, it was time. Her body was shutting down. Her hands shook even when she tried to hold them still. Her thinking felt slow, sluggish, like wading through deep water. These were signs she couldn't ignore if she waited much longer. She wouldn't be capable of making the shot even if the perfect opportunity presented itself. But if she acted too soon, if she rushed and missed, she'd waste the only advantage she had. Riley forced herself to breathe slowly, methodically. Cold air burned her lungs, but the pain helped her focus. She'd trained for this. Not this exact scenario. No training could replicate being alone on a mountain at 20 below zero, preparing for an impossible shot, but the principles were the same. Control what you can control, accept what you can't. She could control her breathing, her positioning, her calculations. She couldn't control the wind, the cold, or whether the enemy commander would present a clear target. So she focused on what she could control. Riley rechecked her data one more time. She'd carved the final calculations into a flat rock with her knife blade, creating a permanent record in case her memory failed. Wind speed, 43 miles per hour, gusting to 58. Direction, west-northwest. Temperature, -22 Fahrenheit. Humidity, 80%. Altitude differential, 2,800 feet. Her ammunition was designed for precision at long range, but even the best bullet was subject to physics. At 4,200 meters, the projectile would be in flight for approximately 6 seconds, 6 seconds during which 1,000 variables could alter its path. She ran through the shot sequence in her mind, visualizing each step like a ritual. Identify the target. Wait for the right moment when he's stationary, when the wind drops, when the shot window opens. Settle into the rifle. Let her body mold to it, become part of it. Control her breathing. Slow it down until her heartbeat becomes audible in her ears. Find the natural respiratory pause between exhale and inhale. The moment of perfect stillness. Align the crosshairs. Not on the target, he was too far away for that. Aim at the point in space where physics and mathematics said the bullet needed to go. Press the trigger. Not pull, press. Smoothly, inevitably, like gravity itself. Then wait. 6 seconds was an eternity. Enough time for the bullet to cross the distance. Enough time to doubt. Enough time to pray. Riley had never been religious, but she understood prayer. It wasn't about divine intervention. It was about accepting that some things were beyond your control, that you could do everything right and still fail. She could live with that. What she couldn't live with was not trying. Her hands had stopped shaking. That was bad. It meant her body was conserving heat, pulling blood away from her extremities to protect her core. Soon her fingers wouldn't work properly. Soon she wouldn't be able to feel the trigger. The window was closing. Riley positioned herself for the shot. Her body became a sculpture of ice and determination. She'd be here for hours now, couldn't risk moving, couldn't risk adjusting. This was the position. This was the commitment. Through the scope, the enemy commander consulted with his officers. They were planning something. Final preparations before the assault, probably. They thought they were safe, that the storm had neutralized any threat from the observation points, that the American platoon was blind and isolated and doomed. They were wrong about that last part. Riley's breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped. Her entire world contracted to a circle of magnified vision and mathematical certainty. She would take this shot. She would give Hayes a chance. And then, whatever happened after that was in hands larger than hers. The cold bit deeper. Her body screamed for movement, for warmth, for relief. She gave it none of these things. A sniper's greatest weapon wasn't the rifle. It was patience. The ability to endure discomfort, to wait when every instinct screamed at you to act, to remain absolutely still while the world tried to shake you apart. Riley had patience. She'd wait as long as necessary. The enemy would give her an opening. They always did. And when they did, she'd be ready. Hayes knew they were in trouble when the mortars started ranging. The first rounds fell short, exploding in the snow 200 meters from the perimeter, probing shots, testing their defenses, mapping their positions. Incoming, someone shouted. Unnecessary, but reflexive. The platoon scrambled to defensive positions with the efficiency of practice. They'd drilled for this. But drills assumed you had intelligence about enemy strength and positioning. Drills assumed you weren't operating blind. Count the rounds, Hayes ordered. I want to know how many tubes they have. Burke was already on it, listening with the intensity of someone whose life depended on the count. I make it 4. No, 5 tubes, probably 82 millimeter. 5 mortars meant a company-sized element at minimum. Maybe more. Chen appeared at Hayes' shoulder. They're walking the rounds in. Next volley will be closer. She was right. The second barrage fell 30 meters from the wire, close enough that they felt the concussion through the ground. Return fire? Burke asked. Hayes shook his head. Not yet. We don't have enough ammunition for a sustained engagement. Let them waste rounds trying to find our exact positions. It was sound tactical logic, but it felt wrong. Every instinct screamed at him to fight back, to show strength, to refuse to be pinned down like animals in a hole. But instinct got soldiers killed. Discipline kept them alive. The third volley was right on target. 2 rounds hit the eastern bunker, collapsing part of the roof. No casualties, but Walsh's fire team was temporarily out of action, buried under sandbags and debris. Another round landed in the vehicle yard, destroyed their only functioning transport. They have a spotter, Reyes said grimly. Someone who can see us. Hayes had reached the same conclusion. The enemy had eyes on them, probably from the same ridge system where Riley should have been watching. Without her counter-observation, they were exposed. Sir, Webb called from the radio. I'm getting reports of movement on all 3 approaches. Multiple squads, moving under cover of the mortar fire. A coordinated assault. Just like they'd feared. Hayes moved to the tactical display. Red markers were multiplying, surrounding their position in a tightening noose. He counted 20, 30, 40 enemy soldiers that they could confirm, which meant there were probably twice that many they couldn't see. We're outnumbered 3 to 1, Chen said quietly. 5 to 1 if they have another element in reserve, Burke added. Hayes studied the map, looking for options that didn't exist. They could retreat to the interior positions, give up the perimeter, and fort up in the main building. That would buy them time but surrender any hope of breaking out. They'd be under siege with dwindling supplies and no hope of rescue until the storm cleared. Or they could try to break out now, fight their way through one of the approach routes, take their chances in the mountains. Both options ended the same way. Just a question of how long it took. Prep the interior fallback, Hayes ordered. But we hold the perimeter as long as we can. Make them pay for every meter. The mortars fell in a steady rhythm now, suppressing their defensive positions, keeping their heads down while the assault teams maneuvered closer. In the eastern bunker, Walsh and her team dug themselves out of the collapse. Brennan was with them, his face covered in dust and blood from a cut on his forehead. You okay? Walsh asked. Brennan nodded, checking his rifle automatically. She'd know what to do, he said. Riley would see them coming. She'd tell us where to focus our fire. Walsh didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The kid was right. Riley would have made all the difference. But Riley was gone, and they were on their own. The assault came from 3 directions simultaneously. Machine gun fire raked their positions, forcing everyone into cover. Then the enemy infantry moved, using fire and maneuver tactics, one team shooting while another advanced. They were good. Professional. Engage at will, Hayes ordered. The platoon opened fire, and for a few minutes it was chaos, the crack of rifles, the deeper boom of their machine gun positions, the scream of mortars overhead, all of it mixing with the howl of the wind and the hiss of snow. They held the first wave. Bodies fell in the snow, and the enemy pulled back to regroup. But Hayes knew it was temporary. The next wave would be stronger. They'd have learned from the first assault, identified weak points, adjusted their tactics. Ammunition count, he ordered. The reports came back, and they were worse than he'd feared. At this rate, they had maybe 2 more engagements before they'd be down to pistols and knives. Brennan appeared in the command post, his eyes wild. We have to signal her. If Riley can see us, if she's out there, she needs to know we're in trouble. Tommy, Reyes said gently, even if she was alive, even if she could see us, there's nothing she could do. She's one person. We're facing a company. You don't know that, Brennan shot back. You don't know what she's capable of. Hayes wanted to tell him to let it go, to focus on what they could control. But he saw something in Brennan's eyes that stopped him, not denial, not delusion, but faith. Real, unshakable faith that Riley was out there, that she hadn't abandoned them, that she was doing something. Maybe they needed that faith right now. Maybe it was the only thing keeping them from giving up entirely. Everyone to your positions, Hayes ordered. Second wave incoming. The enemy attacked again, and again they held. But it cost them. 2 soldiers wounded, ammunition down another 20%. The western bunker took a direct mortar hit and had to be abandoned. The noose was tightening. In the brief lull that followed, Hayes stood at the window, looking out at the snow-covered battlefield. Bodies lay where they'd fallen, already being buried by fresh powder. He thought about Riley one last time, tried to imagine her out there somewhere, watching, calculating, preparing. It was a nice thought. But the truth was simpler and harder. She was gone, and they were going to die here. The only question left was how many they'd take with them. Riley had stopped feeling her fingers 2 hours ago. She'd tried all the tricks, flexing them inside her gloves, pressing them against the warmth of her armpits, breathing on them. Nothing worked. The cold had won. Her hands were essentially frozen clubs attached to the ends of her arms. But she could still feel the trigger. That was all that mattered. Through the scope, she watched the enemy commander coordinate the assault. He'd positioned himself on a small rise, probably thinking he was far enough back to be safe, close enough forward to maintain tactical control. He was wrong on both counts. Riley had been observing him for 7 hours now, barely moving, barely breathing, becoming part of the mountain itself. She knew his patterns, the way he gestured when giving orders, the unconscious habit he had of touching his radio every few minutes. The fact that he checked his watch precisely every 30 minutes, that last detail was going to kill him. Because when someone becomes that predictable, that rhythmic, a sniper can time their shot to the second. The next check would come in 90 seconds. Riley ran through her final calculations one more time. She'd already accounted for every variable she could measure or estimate. Now it was about execution. Wind speed at her position, steady at 45 miles per hour from the west-northwest. She'd been watching the snow patterns for hours, had internalized the rhythm of the gusts. Mid-range wind, impossible to measure precisely, but the movement of snow in the valley suggested slightly less, maybe 35 to 40. Wind at target. She estimated based on how the flags near the command post moved, maybe 20 to 25. Temperature differential between her position and the valley floor, approximately 15 degrees. Warmer air is less dense, which would affect bullet flight. The Coriolis effect. At this latitude and distance, shooting roughly south, the bullet would drift east. She'd calculated 18 inches of drift. Bullet drop. At 4,200 meters. Even with her high-powered rifle and precision ammunition, The bullet would drop approximately 98 feet from boreline. She'd be aiming at a spot in empty air, trusting mathematics to guide the projectile down to Earth in exactly the right place. Flight time, 6 seconds, give or take. 60 seconds until the shot window. Riley settled deeper into her position. Her body had gone beyond cold into something else, a state where pain became abstract, where physical discomfort existed but didn't matter. Hypothermia had its own strange mercy. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. Each breath was measured, deliberate, timed. In, hold, out, hold. The natural pause between exhale and inhale, that's where the shot would come from. 45 seconds. Through the scope, she could see the assault on the outpost. Muzzle flashes, explosions, bodies moving through the snow. Hayes and the others were fighting for their lives down there. She could help them, but only if this worked. 30 seconds. The enemy commander was speaking with his officers, pointing toward the outpost, making final adjustments to his plan, confident in his superiority, certain of victory. Riley aligned her crosshairs, not on him, but on the point in space 30 feet above and 12 feet to the left of where he stood. That's where the bullet needed to go to account for drop and wind drift. It looked absurd. She was aiming at empty air, trusting in physics and mathematics, and 1,000 hours of training that told her this could work. 15 seconds. Her heart rate dropped to 40 beats per minute. The world contracted to the circle of magnified vision, to the pressure of the trigger against her finger, to the rhythm of her breath. 10 seconds. The commander checked his watch. Right on schedule. Riley's breathing stopped. The natural pause. Perfect stillness. 5 seconds. He looked up from his watch, started to turn toward his second-in-command. The crosshairs held steady on empty air. Every variable accounted for. Every calculation complete. Now it was just physics and faith. Riley pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The sound of the shot was swallowed almost immediately by the wind, absorbed by the vast indifference of the mountain. For 6 seconds, the bullet flew. 6 seconds where it encountered wind that pushed it, temperature differentials that bent its path, the rotation of the Earth itself exerting its subtle force. 6 seconds where Riley could do nothing but wait and watch and hope that every calculation was correct, that every estimation was accurate, that the universe would cooperate just this once. Through the scope, she saw the commander's head snap back. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The entire enemy position froze for a heartbeat, trying to understand what had just happened. Their leader had been standing there, and then he wasn't, and there had been no sound, no warning, no indication of where death had come from. Riley didn't move, didn't celebrate, didn't even breathe yet. One shot, one target. But the ripple effects were just beginning. She watched as confusion spread through the enemy ranks like a disease. Officers shouted orders that contradicted each other. Soldiers looked around wildly, trying to identify a threat they couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't comprehend. How do you fight a ghost? The assault on the outpost faltered. Not stopped, not yet, but hesitant now, uncertain. That hesitation would save lives. Riley finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands shook not from the cold now, but from adrenaline, from the release of 7 hours of absolute control. She'd done it. 4,200 meters. Through wind and cold and conditions that should have made it impossible. She'd done it, but she wasn't finished yet. The silence came first. Hayes heard it before he understood it, the sudden absence of coordinated enemy fire, the confused shouting in a language he didn't speak, the sound of an assault that had lost its spine. "They're pulling back," Chen said, disbelief in her voice. Through the scope on his rifle, Hayes watched enemy soldiers retreat from their positions, not in an organized withdrawal, but in something close to panic. Officers screamed orders that weren't being followed. The tight formations they'd maintained throughout the assault dissolved into chaos. "What the hell?" Burke muttered. Reyes was at the thermal imaging scope, scanning the enemy positions. "Their command post is in disarray. I'm seeing bodies. Someone went down hard." "Sniper?" Walsh suggested. "From where?" Reyes countered. "We're surrounded. There's nobody out there except..." He stopped. Everyone in the command post turned to look at each other, the same impossible thought forming simultaneously. "No," Chen said. The distance alone. She's alive. Brennan appeared in the doorway, his face transformed. I told you, I told all of you, Riley's alive, and she just saved us. We don't know that, Hayes started, but his voice lacked conviction. Because what else could explain it? The enemy had been moments away from overrunning their position. Victory had been certain. And then their commander, it had to be their commander, had been struck down by a shot that came from nowhere, from a distance and angle that shouldn't have been possible. Webb was frantically working his radio, cycling through frequencies. Riley, if you can hear this, respond. Blackbird, this is Eagle Actual, respond. Static. She destroyed her radio, Reyes said. That's why we never heard from her. She went dark intentionally. It made sense. A working radio was a liability. In some situations it could be tracked, used to locate you. Riley would have known that, would have made the choice to cut communication rather than risk compromise. Sir, they're regrouping, Burke reported. The assault is definitely over, but they're not running, they're consolidating. Hayes moved to the window. The enemy had fallen back to defensive positions, establishing a perimeter. They were hurt, confused, but still combat effective. And now, they knew someone was out there, someone with the capability to reach out and kill from impossible range. They'll be looking for her, Chen said quietly. Hayes nodded. The enemy would be sending teams into the mountains, trying to locate and eliminate the threat. They'd be systematic about it, professional. And Riley was alone, possibly injured, certainly exhausted and low on supplies. She'd bought them time, but at what cost to herself? We need to help her, Brennan said. We don't even know where she is, Reyes pointed out. She could be anywhere in a 50 square kilometer area. Then we search all 50 square kilometers, Brennan shot back. Hayes held up a hand. Nobody's going anywhere until we understand the tactical situation. But even as he said it, he was calculating. The storm had lessened enough that movement was possible, difficult, but possible. If they sent out a small team, if they had some idea of where to look. The shot came from high elevation, Reyes said, thinking out loud. Probably one of the northern peaks. To get that kind of angle on their command post, she'd need to be above the ridgeline. Chen pulled up a topographical map. That narrows it down, maybe 6 or 7 possible positions. She traced her finger along the map. Here, here, and here are the most likely. That's still a lot of ground to cover, Burke noted. So we split up, Brennan said immediately. 3 teams, 2 people each. Too risky, Hayes countered. If the enemy is searching too, we could walk right into them. Then we're just leaving her up there? Brennan's voice rose. After what she just did for us? The room went quiet. Because he was right. Riley had sacrificed everything, her safety, her comfort, possibly her life to give them a chance. Walking away from her now felt like betrayal. But Hayes had to think about the platoon as a whole. Risking 6 more soldiers to save 1 was exactly the kind of emotional decision that got people killed. Webb, Hayes said finally, keep trying to raise her. All frequencies. If she destroyed her primary radio, she might still have a backup. Webb nodded, already adjusting dials. Hayes turned to Chen. I want a threat assessment. The enemy is regrouping. What's their most likely next move? They'll either assault again with overwhelming force, or they'll pull back entirely and call for reinforcements, Chen replied. Depends on how spooked they are. Through the window, Hayes watched the enemy positions. They'd established good defensive cover, were clearly planning to stay in the area, but the earlier confidence was gone. They'd learned that the American position had reach, had capabilities they hadn't anticipated. A single shot had changed the entire dynamic of the engagement. Movement, Reyes called out. Northeast sector, single individual, moving slow. Everyone tensed. Friend or enemy? Another sniper? A scout? Through the thermal scope, Reyes tracked the figure. Body temperature is low. Really low. Whoever it is has been outside for a long time. Can you get a positive ID? Hayes asked. Negative. Too much interference from the snow. The figure was moving toward them, but slowly, carefully. Not the movement pattern of an assault, more like someone at the limit of their endurance, forcing themselves forward through sheer will. Sir, Webb said suddenly, his voice tight. I've got something. It's faint, breaking up, but... A voice came through the speaker, barely audible through static and wind interference. Tune. Extraction. Enemy search teams. Moving. It was Riley. Her voice was weak, slurred with cold and exhaustion, but unmistakably hers. Brennan let out a sound that might have been a laugh, or a sob, or both. Riley, say again, Webb transmitted. We're reading you weak and broken. Can't hold. Position. Need extraction. Estimate. 3 hours. Then, nothing but static again. Hayes made his decision in an instant. Chen, you're in command here. Reyes, Burke, Brennan, you're with me. We're bringing her home. Sir, the risk? Chen started. I know the risk, Hayes cut her off. And I'm taking it. Riley gave us a chance. Now we give her one. Outside, the storm was lessening, but still dangerous. Visibility was better than it had been, but that was a double-edged sword. They could see further, but so could the enemy. The 4-person team moved out, following the thermal signature that Reyes had identified. They moved tactically, weapons ready, knowing that enemy search teams were out there somewhere doing exactly what they were doing, looking for Riley Patterson. The difference was, they were going to find her first. The radio signal came in fragments, like broken glass, scattered across silence. Position compromised. Enemy patrol. Grid, November 3. Webb worked the radio with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking, trying to boost the signal, to filter out the interference, to pull Riley's voice out of the static. Can't stay moving too. Riley, we have a team en route to your location. Webb transmitted. Can you move toward grid mic 7? Silence. Then, negative ankle slower than Nastani. She was injured. They'd suspected as much, but confirmation made it real. Riley was hurt, exhausted, hypothermic, and being hunted by enemy search teams. And she was still fighting. Outside the outpost, Hayes and his team pushed through snow that came up to their knees. Brennan was on point, driven by something beyond tactical logic. Reyes followed, weapon ready, eyes scanning for threats. Burke brought up the rear, checking their 6 every 30 seconds. How far? Hayes asked. Reyes checked his GPS. 2 clicks to the thermal signature we identified. But if she's moving, then we adjust? Hayes finished. The wind had dropped to almost nothing, which was both blessing and curse. Easier to move, easier to hear, but easier to be heard too. Every step they took sounded impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. Contact, Brennan hissed, dropping to one knee. Everyone froze. Ahead, maybe 300 meters, figures moved through the snow. 4 of them, spread out in a search pattern, weapons ready. Enemy patrol. Hayes signaled for everyone to take cover. They pressed themselves into the snow behind a rocky outcrop, barely breathing, watching the patrol move across their path. The enemy soldiers were searching methodically, checking every depression, every possible hiding place. They knew someone was up here. They were determined to find her. The patrol passed within 50 meters of their position. Hayes counted heartbeats, watching them disappear into the white landscape. When they were finally out of sight, he signaled to move. They're between us and Riley, Reyes observed quietly. Then we go around them, Hayes replied. They altered course, swinging wide to avoid the patrol. It added 20 minutes to their movement time, 20 minutes that Riley might not have. Webb's voice crackled in Hayes's earpiece. Eagle Actual, be advised we're tracking at least 3 more enemy patrols in your sector. They're saturating the area. Understood, Hayes replied. Any update from Blackbird? Negative. No contact for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of silence. In this cold, 7 minutes could be fatal. Brennan was moving faster now, less concerned with tactical discipline than with speed. Hayes understood the impulse, but couldn't allow it. Tommy, he said quietly, stay focused. We don't help her by getting ourselves killed. Brennan slowed fractionally, but Hayes could see the tension in every line of his body. The kid was holding himself together through sheer force of will. They reached the ridgeline where the thermal signature had been detected. Nothing. Just snow and rock and wind-carved ice. Spread out, Hayes ordered. Search pattern. Stay within visual range of each other. They began to search, looking for any sign tracks, disturbed snow, blood, equipment, anything that would indicate Riley had been here. Reyes found it first. Here. A shallow depression in the snow, sheltered by an overhang of rock, signs of occupation. Melted snow, refrozen in patterns that suggested body heat, a wrapper from an MRE, and scratched into the rock face, barely visible, coordinates. "She left us a trail," Burke said with something like awe in his voice. The coordinates pointed northeast, higher into the mountains, toward positions that were even more exposed, even more dangerous. She was leading them away from the enemy patrols, Hayes realized, drawing them deeper into terrain she knew better than anyone. "Move," he ordered. They followed the trail scratch marks on rocks, disturbed snow, tiny signs that only someone trained to track or to evade would recognize. Riley was leaving them breadcrumbs, trusting they'd be smart enough to follow. Another patrol appeared ahead, and they went to ground again. This time, the enemy passed even closer, close enough that Hayes could hear their radio chatter, could see their breath fogging in the cold air. When they were clear, Brennan pointed upward. There, high on the ridge, maybe 600 meters above them, a figure moved, slow, deliberate, but unmistakably human. "Is that her?" Burke asked. Reyes had his scope out. "Can't confirm. Too much distortion from the weight." "Yeah, that's Riley. I can see her rifle." She was climbing higher. Away from the enemy, yes, but also away from safety, from shelter, from any chance of survival. "She's leading them away from us," Hayes said, understanding, drawing their attention. "We have to reach her before they do," Brennan said. They began to climb. The altitude made every breath feel like swallowing broken glass. The cold bit through their gear despite their layers, but they climbed, following the figure above them, following Riley as she led them toward whatever sanctuary she'd found in this frozen hell. An hour later, they reached a cave entrance, really just a crack in the rock, barely wide enough for a person. And there, just inside, they found her. Riley Patterson was sitting with her back against the stone, rifle across her lap, eyes half closed. She looked up when they approached, and the ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Took you long enough," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Brennan rushed forward, but Reyes caught his arm. They had to be careful. Hypothermia victims needed slow warming, gentle handling. Hayes keyed his radio. "Eagle Actual to base. We have Blackbird. I repeat, we have Blackbird. She's alive." Riley's eyes found his. "The shot? Saved us," Hayes told her. "Changed everything." She nodded slowly, as if that took great effort. "Good. That's good." Her eyes started to close. "Riley, stay with us," Reyes said, already pulling out the thermal blankets, the warming packs, beginning the process of bringing her body temperature up slowly. "Not going anywhere," Riley murmured. "Too tired. To die." And despite everything, the cold, the danger, the enemy patrols still searching for them, Hayes found himself smiling. She'd done it. Against impossible odds, in conditions that should have killed her, she'd survived. More than survived, she'd saved them all. Now it was their turn to save her. Getting Riley down the mountain took every bit of skill and luck they had. She couldn't walk, her injured ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, and hypothermia had robbed her of coordination. Reyes and Burke fashioned a makeshift litter from their packs and paracord, creating a platform they could drag through the snow. "3 enemy patrols between us and the outpost," Hayes said, studying his map. "We can't avoid all of them." "So we don't avoid them," Riley said. Her voice was stronger now after warm fluids and slow rewarming, but still fragile. "We use them." Hayes looked at her. "Explain." "They're searching for one person," Riley said. "Me. Alone. They're not expecting a team." "You want to ambush them," Brennan said. "I want to make them think twice about continuing the search," Riley corrected. "Hit one patrol hard, make it clear that whoever they're looking for isn't alone. They'll pull back, call for reinforcements, give us time to move." It was risky. But staying put was riskier, and trying to evade 3 patrols while carrying an injured soldier through snow was nearly impossible. "We choose the ground," Hayes decided. "Set up an ambush, make it quick, break contact before they can respond." They moved down the mountain, Riley on the litter, the others taking turns, dragging and providing security. Every 100 meters felt like a mile. Every sound could be an enemy patrol. Reyes found the position a narrow pass where the terrain funneled movement, where they'd have clear fields of fire and good cover. "Next patrol that comes through here," he said, "we own them." They set up in a textbook L-shaped ambush, 2 soldiers on each leg of the formation. Riley insisted on being positioned where she could contribute fire despite her condition. "I didn't survive 4 days on that mountain to be dead weight now," she said. They waited. 30 minutes later, the patrol appeared. 4 soldiers moving in a loose formation, confident, weapons lowered. They never had a chance. Hayes initiated the ambush, and for 15 seconds it was controlled violence, precise fire, disciplined bursts, no wasted ammunition. When it was over, the enemy patrol was down and they were already moving, using the confusion to put distance between themselves and the enemy response that would inevitably come. "Contact, contact." They heard over captured enemy radio frequencies. "Patrol 4 is down. Multiple hostiles." The effect was immediate. Other patrols began calling in, requesting support, consolidating positions. The search pattern collapsed as the enemy shifted to defensive postures, just like Riley had predicted. They moved faster now, knowing they had a brief window before the enemy regrouped and expanded their search with greater force. The outpost came into view as the sun began to set, what little light filtered through the perpetual gray clouds. Chen had security teams watching, ready to provide covering fire if needed. "Eagle Actual. This is base." Chen transmitted. "We have you visual. Path is clear. Come home." The last 500 meters felt longer than all the miles before them. Riley's breathing had become labored, her skin temperature too low despite their best efforts. She needed real medical care, soon. They crossed the perimeter wire at dusk. The platoon had turned out to watch them arrive. Soldiers lined up along the defensive positions, silent, respectful. When they saw Riley on the litter, someone started clapping, then another, then everyone. Riley's eyes opened slightly. "Tell them to save it. For the memorial service." "No memorial service," Brennan said fiercely. "You're going to be fine." The medic specialist Jordan Mills was waiting with a full trauma kit. They transferred Riley to a heated room, began the careful process of treating hypothermia and assessing her other injuries. Hayes watched through the window as Mills worked. Riley was unconscious now, her body finally allowing itself to shut down now that she was safe. "She's going to make it, right?" Brennan asked quietly. "She survived 4 days alone in sub-zero temperatures," Chen said. "Made an impossible shot. Led us on a chase through enemy territory. I'd bet on her against pretty much anything." Hayes agreed, but kept the thought to himself. Riley had pushed far beyond normal human limits. The question wasn't whether she was strong enough to survive, she'd already proven that. The question was what permanent damage the mountain had done. Frostbite, hypothermia, exhaustion. The toll would be significant. But she was alive, and the platoon was alive because of her. That night, the enemy pulled back. Not a retreat, more of a tactical repositioning. They'd lost their commander, lost their momentum, and lost their conviction that this was going to be an easy victory. The storm finally broke just after midnight. Stars appeared for the first time in a week, sharp and cold and beautiful. In the medical bay, Riley slept deeply, her body beginning the long process of healing. Brennan sat beside her, refusing to leave despite multiple orders to get some rest. "She came back," he said to no one in particular. "I knew she would." Hayes stood in the doorway, watching. Faith, he thought. The kid had faith when everyone else had doubt, and he'd been right. Sometimes that mattered more than logic or odds or tactical assessment. Sometimes faith was enough. 3 weeks later, the official report was filed. It documented an enemy assault on Forward Operating Base Summit, located in mountainous terrain during extreme weather conditions. It noted that the assault was repelled with minimal casualties, thanks in part to precision fire from an elevated observation position. Riley Patterson's name appeared nowhere in the report. She'd requested that specifically. No commendations, no medals, no official recognition. The shot 4,200 meters through conditions that should have made it impossible remained classified. Operational security, the brass called it. Better not to advertise capabilities. But in the small community of military snipers, the story spread anyway. Whispered conversations, knowing looks, a legend that grew with each retelling. The shot from nowhere. The ghost in the snow. The sniper who disappeared for 4 days and saved a platoon with a single bullet. Some of the details got exaggerated. The distance grew to 5 kilometers, then 6 in some versions. The number of days she'd survived alone stretched to a week, then 10 days. The shot that killed the enemy commander became 3 shots, 5 shots, an entire assault team eliminated by invisible fire. Riley heard these stories and said nothing. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth was simpler and stranger than any legend. She'd done her job. That was all. The physical recovery took months. Frostbite had claimed 3 toes on her left foot, 2 fingers on her right hand. The doctors said she'd never shoot quite the same way again. The nerve damage would affect her trigger control, her ability to maintain steady pressure through a long shot sequence. They didn't know Riley. She adapted, changed her grip, modified her technique, spent hours on the range, relearning muscle memory that had been disrupted by injury. 6 months after the mountain, she qualified expert marksman again. 8 months later, she was back with the platoon. Hayes tried to talk her into a teaching position, somewhere warm and safe where her experience could train the next generation. "With all due respect, sir," Riley said, "that sounds like hell." So she stayed, resumed her position as the platoon's primary long-range specialist, worked with Brennan, who'd requested sniper training and showed surprising aptitude. The enemy never attempted another assault on FOB Summit. They'd learned their lesson. The high ground belonged to the Americans, and the Americans had someone watching. Always watching. On the 1-year anniversary of the shot, the platoon held a quiet ceremony. No cameras, no press, just the soldiers who'd been there. They stood on the outpost wall at sunset, looking north toward the mountains where Riley had spent 4 days alone in the cold. Chen raised a glass coffee, since alcohol wasn't permitted on deployment. "To Blackbird," she said simply. "To Blackbird," the others echoed. Riley stood with them, uncomfortable with the attention but understanding its necessity. These people were her family. They needed this closure, this acknowledgement of what they'd been through together. "Did you know it would work?" Brennan asked her quietly. "When you took that shot, did you know it was possible?" Riley considered the question. Honest answer? No. The variables had been too extreme, the conditions too poor, the distance too great. By every logical measure, the shot should have failed. But she'd taken it anyway. "I knew it had to work," she said finally. "So I made it work." That was the truth of it. Not skill alone, not training alone, but will. The absolute refusal to accept that her people would die because she hadn't tried. Later that night, after the others had returned to their duties, Riley climbed to the highest point of the outpost. From here, she could see the northern ridgeline, the mountains where she'd nearly died. The peaks looked different now, less hostile, more familiar. She knew their contours, their hiding places, their cruel beauty. Part of her was still up there, she realized. Left behind in that crack in the rock, preserved in ice and memory. The part that had believed survival was optional if duty required sacrifice. She'd gotten both. Survived and succeeded. But it had been close. Too close. Would she do it again? Make that same choice? Take that same risk? Without hesitation. Because that's what snipers did. They took the impossible shots. The ones nobody else could make, in conditions nobody else could survive, for reasons that mattered more than personal safety. They watched, they waited, and when the moment came, they didn't miss. A gust of wind swept across the outpost, carrying snow and memory. Somewhere in the darkness, another enemy force was planning, preparing, looking for weakness. They wouldn't find it, because Riley Patterson was watching, silent,